Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. And welcome today to a review that's a bit of a 3-for-1 deal. The thumbnail shows you one watch and it tells you that it has a washi paper dial for a bargain price. But there are two other watches on the bench for review today as well. One with a translucent dial, an unusual date complication, and one with a full lume dial. All of which share the same case, same bracelet, etc. etc. So, maybe press pause on the video, make yourself a cup of coffee because we're both going to have to be pretty sharp for this one. It's the MMI Norlight, sort of anyway, and it's the latest release, or releases, by Singaporean microbrand MMI. Now I have looked at a couple of their watches before, and I like the brand because they genuinely try to do something different. If I'm talking about washi dials, lume dials and translucent dials, then you know I'm talking about something different. These watches are live on Kickstarter at the moment. It was fully funded within 30 minutes and they're now pushing towards 200 orders, which is fantastic. Now you saw the pop-up? This video is sponsored by MMI. I will therefore of course leave a link to that campaign in the description of the video. But I had a chat with the brand owner Victor and I told him that this was going to be a mixed review. This watch definitely has some pros, but it also definitely has some cons. So make sure, as always, that you stick around for the moans and niggles section. We have a lot to get through today, so let's flip the camera and get on with it. Okay, let's get into it. Packaging is perfectly reasonable for the amount of money you are paying. I will of course talk cash later. Small outer cardboard coffin with the brand logo. Inside a PU leatherette watch roll containing several pouches and the brand logo. Now I do hope you've had a coffee. This watch gets better value the more expensive it becomes, which is oxymoronic. There is no doubt about that. Have a brief look at this NATO strap and have a brief look at this leather strap. I will return to them both a bit later on in the video as I explain myself. I will also return to the warranty card a bit later in the video as well for obvious reasons. Modernization, modification, innovation. It's a bit hokey, as is the Comic Sans style font, that's for sure, but I think MMI are a brand that actually lives up to their own mantra, so I will let them off with it. What I won't let them off with is a 1-year warranty. You know that will be featuring once more later on in the video. But leaving all that to one side, there is a rather attractive orange watch containing a dial made from 3 layers of handmade Japanese washi paper. Now, I own a washi paper dial Citizen Chronomaster, but it cost $2,000 US. This MMI cost just north of $300 US. And it's a very nice shade of orange as well. Perhaps not quite as bright as it appears in some of these shots. I think one of these kind of central static shots is probably fairly representative. But as you can see here, the dial finish is inconsistent. It is intentionally inconsistent. This is a super thin handmade material layered onto a watch dial. Every single dial, therefore, is different, and there are going to be some variations, some imperfections, however you want to see them, in every single dial. So again, do bear that in mind if you fancy one of the washi ones. But you don't have to go for the washi dial one if you don't want to. As noted, there is a second dial, identical case bracelet, identical dial layout, also a sandwich layer dial, but this time with a print on the dial rather than handmade paper. It's kind of hard to see what that print actually is when the watch is in hand, or especially on wrist. From certain angles, it almost looks like it has a mother of pearl dial finish. This one, however, makes sense after dark. I wouldn't normally show you a lume shot this early in a video, but in this case, I think it's entirely appropriate. That pattern now becomes a loomed representation of the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights, hence the model name Norlight. So, are you still with me? One washi paper, one full lume, both using the same layered dial construction. But you don't have to go for either of those dials if you don't want to, because MMI offer a third dial, again using the same layer, that kind of clear top layer. This one is translucent. You can see various parts of the Miyota 9000 series beneath it, and this one contains MMI's signature date complication. I've seen Oris do this on some of their Aqua special editions, but I personally haven't seen any other small brand do this way of indicating the date. You do, however, need sharp eyes to see where that little red square is, but it is an interesting way of representing the date, that's for sure. So, one watch, 3 ways essentially. And don't worry, there are still a few more surprises up their collective sleeves for later. Let's do the basics though, let's get dimensions and specifications out of the way. They all have the same case and bracelet, so they're all going to be identical in size and within a couple of grams of each other in terms of weight. It's a nicely proportioned watch. I measure it at 39.2mm in diameter with a thickness of 11.9 and a lug to lug of 46, which is nice and wearable. Lug width is 20, there's a taper down to 18 and back up to 20 again for the clasp. Sized up for me, my 7-inch wrist, it weighs in at 137 grams. All watches offer 100 meters of water resistance, all have double domed sapphire crystal, and all are powered by a Miyota 9000 series. There is a little bit of divergence when it comes to the casebacks though. The Washi Dial features the Japanese factory's logo and name on the display glass. More on that later. It also features the obligatory spec sheet around its edge. These are going to be a numbered limited release, which is always nice. The two non-Washi models feature the same movement, but a slightly different case back, this time featuring the print of the Northern Lights, the same print that features on the front of the Lume Dial watch. Now, this seems reasonable for the full Lume Dial watch, but I'm not sure why the translucent dial version is even called Norlight, or why it features the Aurora Borealis picture on the case back. Again, more on all of this later. The cases are the same one for all watches, pretty basic. They remind me very much of the Tissot PR100. They're almost identical in fact in proportions and the way the lugs are cut and the way that fixed high polished bezel sits on top. Finishing is basic but acceptable, brushed upper lug surfaces but mostly polish everywhere else. There is a little high polish chamfer running to the tip of those lugs. Now the crown features the MMI logo. This is a prototype, these are all prototypes. They're going to increase the size of the crown for production units, which is a good thing because I found this one a little bit too small for comfortable usage. The bracelet is also perfectly acceptable. It's a flat link Jubilee style. The 3 inner links high polish, the outer links brushed to match the lug brushing. Screws hold it together and I had no problems operating the screws by the way. Now the clasp on this prototype is also perfectly acceptable. Pressed upper, milled lower, branded fold over, double pushers, 5 holes and micro adjust. I'm sure you've seen this one before. I know I have. They are going to add an on the fly adjustable clasp to all of these Norlights if they hit a certain sales figure. So the more they sell, the more they cost, but the more they sell, the better value they are. It's all a bit weird today. Let's have a brief look at the dial and hands of all 3 watches today, and I do therefore mean brief. I'm going to start with the translucent dial one with MMI's signature date complication. There's definitely a whiff of Patek about the dial layout, and I think the proportions have been set according to this dial. All numerals and triangles are printed on this model and all others. They're all sized so that they don't obscure that date wheel. Now I do like this date complication, but it will probably take more than a glance or two for you to locate where the orange indicator actually is. They sent me a blue prototype, but there are a number of more interesting colours than this I feel, including a red one. Again, check the campaign for more details. The logo is printed above the pinion, automatic beneath it, and there are printed minute markers around the outer edge of the dial. I'm sure you spotted those little screws, 2 on either side, holding the layers of the dial together. They are present on all 3 different versions. The translucent effect means you get to see bits of the movement, but there's nothing much happening. No springs, no wheels. This would have looked a lot better with a dedicated skeletonized movement, I think. Moving on to the Lume Dial. Again, all markers are printed on top of the top layer, but they haven't changed the size of the numerals or the batons. And because this one doesn't have that internal date complication, we're left with a lot of dead space on the dial. The Northern Lights pattern can be seen from certain angles, but it's barely noticeable from arm's length and really only comes into its own after dark. During the day, it just looks like a fairly plain white dial watch. Now, this could go either way. You could enjoy having the Lume as your own little secret, or you could end up wishing for a bit more visual interest during the day, which is when you'll spend most of the time looking at the watch, let's be honest. And finally, let's have a look at what I think is the pick of the 3, the Washi Dial. Again, check the campaign for more details. This is made of 3 layers of super thin handmade Japanese paper with a piece of perspex on top, screws holding all together, and all numerals and markings printed on that top piece. I love the orange, I'm into orange this year, and this is actually a very similar orange to the orange that Citizen have been using on a couple of their watches that I have purchased. But again, like the Lume Dial, the numerals come over as a bit small, as does the logo. All of the printing gets a bit lost in all of that space. It's the same handset on all three, segmented beveled dauphines for the hour and minute. They're a nice size, and there's an arrowhead second hand with Lume tip. Now, we've already had a look at the Lume on the full Lume Dial, but as it's this watch's USP, we should have a look at it again, shouldn't we? Initially bright, but fading with time, the hands still give a decent read though at the end of my test. And again, it's the same story with the other two, which feature loomed hands and loomed printed indices. The printing fades, but the hands hang on in there. It's not spectacular, but it's certainly usable and commensurate with the Lume you would hope for in this style of watch. What about the on-wrist experience then? Well, it's the same for all three. Nothing much to report here either way. The weight feels good for the size, and there's plenty of adjustability in the clasp. The bracelet also has quick release end links, by the way, which is great to see, especially what I'm about to tell you about straps. 12mm isn't particularly thick, but it's not particularly thin either considering the Miyota. One effect that I did like was that the Perspex top layer becomes part of the show. It appears and disappears as a glassy upper surface depending on the angle of your wrist. It means that the washi isn't quite as evident at all times, but it does add a second element, so I guess it swings and roundabouts. Pocket shot to finish, plenty of adjustability as noted. This is going to fit most people. It's a good size. It's a kind of nice median size shape and weight. I'm sure quite deliberately. Alright, before I get into the bones, remember I said the more expensive it got, the better value it got, which is completely upside down. The more of these they sell, the less early birds are available, so the price goes steadily up. The first 100 were just over $300. The next 100 or so that you can currently buy are coming in at around $335. But with every watch sold, more and more stretch goals are unlocked. And quite a few have been unlocked already, including the NATO strap that I showed you earlier, which is actually a really good NATO strap as far as these things go anyway. The leather strap has also been unlocked. Perhaps it's not quite as nice, relatively speaking, as the NATO, but hey, you can't complain if they're going to chuck one at you for free. They're also now going to throw in a rubber strap, and if they sell a few more, they're going to upgrade the clasp to one with on-the-fly adjustment. So if you did snag one of these on the early bird, you'll be licking your lips watching other people jump on board because your deal keeps getting better and better as they do. And if they hit that last stretch goal with the clasp, you're looking at a pretty good deal. Miyota 9000 with an interesting dial, whichever one you pick, decent case and bracelet, sapphire crystal, 3 additional straps, quick release spring bars, and on-the-fly adjustability, all for under $350. That is actually alright in today's market. Alright, moans and niggles, I did say this wasn't a 2 thumbs up review. You've probably intimated a few of my complaints already, but here they are. 1 year warranty. We already know that's going to be on the complaints list today, so it's on the complaint list today. There is definite inconsistency across the washi paper on this orange model. Looks a bit patchy in some spots, a little bit grubby in others, so you're going to have to be on board with that if you want one of these. And I don't understand what they've done with the casebacks. Why have a display case back and then obscure the movement with an image of the washi paper manufacturer? I don't think this is the best of both worlds. I think they actually diminish each other. And again, why have a display case back and then put an even larger picture of the Aurora Borealis on top of it? Pick one or pick the other, but don't try and do both. I think they've just tried to do too much and not got it quite right. And did I mention that the caseback images are loomed? Yes indeed, along with the crowns they are loomed. But I have no idea why you would want to loom a part of the watch that sits against the wrist. I've seen some bonker stuff over the years, but this is up there with the best of it. And finally, one more look at the dial. I don't think the proportions are quite right here. I think they designed the proportions, the numeral size, the indices size, around that internal date complication, and it looks okay on that model. But they've just copied and pasted to the other two. I think the numerals should have been larger, the logo should have been larger. There's a rumour that they are going to increase the logo size, but don't take my word for it. Again, check the campaign for that. I think perhaps Victor has tried to do too much here. He's had 3 good ideas, and rather than make 3 watches, he's tried to put all 3 good ideas into the same case at the same time, and it doesn't quite work. The translucent dial is fun, but it really needs a skeletonized movement to take advantage of it, and let's be honest, it's a watch with no connection to the Northern Lights with a picture of the Northern Lights on the caseback. The full Lume dial is fun, but it suffers from a dial layout carried over from the translucent watch. The washi paper is the most interesting of the 3, and it's great value for what it is, but again, it looks a bit sparse and has that logo on the caseback which is loomed for reasons best known only to MMI. I don't want this to sound like an evisceration because it isn't. These 3 are still good value and really unusual in each of their own right. But I think maybe each of the 3 would have benefited from a bit more individualization rather than homogenization. Perhaps one size doesn't fit all. Perhaps it's possible to have too much innovation in one model, and MMI should have saved some of their good ideas for future watches rather than trying to cram them all into this one. So there you have it. Did I just review 1 watch or 3 watches? Even I'm not quite sure. This orange washi paper dial seems like the pick of the bunch to me. It's a great colour and it's very unusual to find a washi paper dial at this end of the market. Plus, if they can hit a couple more stretch goals, it's actually really good value. But it's not perfect. I think there is too much dead space on the dial, and why on earth do you put Lume on a caseback? I am still scratching my head about that one. But hey, at least they're doing something different. If you like MMI watches, but not this MMI watch, may I suggest you watch either of these 2 videos, also reviews of MMI watches. Well done for making it all the way to the end of this one. I'll see you again in the next one.